Welcome to Road to Recovery.
Welcome to Road to Recovery, Advocacy and Insights for Trucking Accidents with Sagi Shaked. Sagi is founder of Shaked Law Personal Injury Lawyers and is ranked as one of the top 100 trial lawyers in the United States by the American Trial Lawyers Association. With a wealth of experience in personal injury, wrongful death, and complex litigation cases, he passionately advocates for victims and has recovered multi-million-dollar settlements and damages for his clients. I'm your host, Abigail Vaca, and today's episode is Fighting the Insurance Companies, Winning a TBI Claim After a Truck Accident. Thank you for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Abigail.
So, off the bat, why do insurance companies often downplay TBIs in truck accident cases?
Yeah, it's a very good question, and they downplay them. So insurance companies are always looking to downplay or lowball traumatic brain injury cases. They tell the attorneys, they even tell me, which is ridiculous, but they do. This person doesn't have a brain injury. The person healed. It's not that bad. They'll get back to normal. They treat them like they're orthopedic injuries, like a herniated disc or something. Or, one of the things they love to say is the person didn't suffer a concussion or a brain injury, or the person didn't lose consciousness, so you can't have a traumatic brain injury. We know that's false. The literature clearly talks about it, and I'll do a whole episode just on loss of consciousness and what the literature shows. The next defense they'll say is, or nonsense that we hear from the adjusters and the insurance companies, well, the CT scan came back normal, so they can't have a brain injury. That's not true. People go to the hospitals for emergency situations. And then if it's not an emergency, they release them to go follow up with other doctors, right? That's why we have all these other doctors, neurologists, orthopedics, chiropractors, psychiatrists. They're not all at the hospital. Otherwise, there wouldn't even be other doctors. So you have that. Then the insurance company will say, oh, these are all what they call subjective answers, meaning the person has mood swings. That's all subjective, depending on who you're asking, or everything is subjective. Their memory loss. We can't prove it with an objective test. This is what they try to say. And they try to offer low money. So, for example, we had a case. It took us a couple of years, but they offered us $18,000 on a traumatic brain injury case. And I tell the insurance company, you're really out of your mind. It just doesn't make any sense. Sure enough, 3 years later, right before we're getting ready to pick a jury, they paid us the $5 million in insurance. So it really, depends on who you get as your adjuster. But most of the time, the insurance companies, they're going to lowball you because it doesn't, fit into their playbook, and they don't want to pay. They're not in the business of paying claims. They're in the business of keeping those premiums to themselves and, not working for the little guy. So we're here to help the little guy and help you recognize when you have these issues. So insurance companies, not on your side.
So, what tactics do trucking companies and their insurers use to deny TBI claims?
Yeah, so they'll try to say, they'll hire one of these defense doctors, and I call them defense doctors or hired guns, to say that the person's injuries are not from this crash, or that it's all pre-existing. I mean, we had one where our client sustained a traumatic brain injury. Actually, I talked about it on one of the podcasts, where he had a fatigue as his main symptom from the traumatic brain injury, or one of his main symptoms. And for 15 to 20 years, the guy was working, 20 years actually, was working 15 hours a day, 5-6 days a week with no issues. He had diabetes during that whole time period. Of course, what does the defense doctor say? Because they don't have anything else to say. It must have been his diabetes acting up. You mean the diabetes was acting up at the same time as the traumatic brain injury occurred, and that's why he started getting fatigued? Not for the 20 years before. So, they argue pre-existing conditions unrelated to the TBI. I mean, obviously, if a person has pre-existing head injury, that's important to know. That's, very important. They say that it's a psychological claim, that it's all in their head and they're malingering. That they're lying, basically. They're only doing it for the money. Yeah, like someone would want to go injure their brain for money. If the person has delayed diagnosis, meaning they didn't go right away to the hospital or the doctor and they waited weeks upon weeks, not good for your case. It's not the end of your case, but it's not good for your case because that'll feed into the insurance company, motto of deny, delay, and don't pay claims. So that's the kind of thing that they do. And then they offer, again, lowball settlement offers that just don't make any sense. So if you have a traumatic brain injury and it meets, there's good liability, meaning how the crash occurred, your client went to the doctor's office, don't fall for those lowball settlement offers. Get real justice for your clients. Don't just take what the insurance companies offer you.
So, how important is expert testimony in a TBI case, and what types of medical records or tests can help strengthen a case?
When we talk about medical experts in a traumatic brain injury, it's critical because we have to explain the injury to the jury. The insurance company has to know that you're competent to do that. So you're going to need a neurologist because that's usually the person that the patient or the client would have to go see is a neurologist, someone who deals with the brain, and they'll be able to explain that. If you had positive diagnostic tests like an MRI or a CT, you'd want to speak with, or the medical expert would be the radiologist or neuroradiologist. If there's neuropsych testing, you'd want to speak to a neuropsychologist. Let's say your client has eye issues. So in the past, we've had optometrists as medical experts. We've had ophthalmologists trained in neurology as well. If you have hearing issues or ringing in your ears or hearing loss, you'd want to get an audiologist, and you'd also want to get an ear, nose, and throat doctor. So if you're having psychological issues, you want to get a psychiatrist. So it really depends on what part of your brain was injured. So what doctors or experts to get. But it'll all start off, in my mind, with a neurologist, and the neurologist will dictate what kind of treatment your client needs or what kind of treatment the person who has a traumatic brain injury will need.
And what kind of damages can be recovered in a TBI lawsuit?
So yeah, that's a good question. So when you have a traumatic brain injury, we talk about a couple of things. We talk about your medical bills, your lost wages, future medical bills, future loss of future income. Then we talk about past pain and suffering, future pain and suffering. Those things are, loss of enjoyment of life. In rare cases where you can get punitive damages. Punitive damages are when you have not a client's conduct, but the defendant's conduct, the person who caused the crash, their conduct is so gross and reckless. You have a truck driver, they're driving drunk or they're driving high. Believe it or not, it does happen. They do that. So those are things that, I would look to recover for my clients if we can get a punitive damages case, which we've had before in the past and have a couple pending right now. Would definitely do that.
Do you have any successes you'd like to share?
Yeah, absolutely. So we had a client who had a traumatic brain injury, and his seizures did not come about till 3 years later. And that's important because seizures don't necessarily have to come around right away. Epilepsy. Our client was in an elevator, a ceiling panel fell on his head, got concussed, went to the hospital the following day, and they diagnosed him with a concussion, but his CT scan came back normal. Then his MRI scan came back normal. But the neurologist, was able to put the pieces of the puzzle together and say that the seizures that this person had, even though they were 3 years later, were all related to him being hit by that 15-pound ceiling panel that fell from the elevator onto his head. We were able to go to trial, and we got a $6 million verdict for our client who sustained a traumatic brain injury. Now, keep in mind, when you have a brain injury, some of the things you're going to need to do to prove your case, like in that case, you're going to need the emergency room records. You're going to need the medical records. You're going to need your neurologist to talk about the different types of evaluations that were done in the case. If you have positive imaging, like diagnostics tests, you want to bring them in. If it's a CT or an MRI, diffuse tensor imaging, you want to bring that in. If it's not, the defense is going to harp on it. Even let's say you had a positive CT or a positive MRI. The defense says those aren't big deals. It's not a big deal when someone has that. Of course, it's a huge deal but they say it's not a big deal. Now, if you don't have it, if the diagnostic studies come back negative, the defense experts are suddenly saying it's the biggest deal in the world. How can they have a brain injury if the scans are negative? So they can't have their cake and eat it too, but that's what they try to do. So a good lawyer is going to pick that apart. Your neuropsychological testing, if you have that in your case, you can show where the deficits are. Again, the defense is going to hire their own neuropsychological doctor or physician to combat what plaintiff's neuropsychologist is saying. And then I think extremely important to traumatic brain injury cases is one, keeping a journal of what the person is going through. What also is important is your before and after witnesses. Why do I say that? Because before and after witnesses can really talk about what your client has gone through and what they're going through and what their life was like before. So it's important to speak to them when you have these cases and really get an understanding of who your client was and who they are now, because people change after this when their brain gets impacted. You see it sometimes when a computer is no longer functioning the same. It's not as fast because it maybe got dropped, and the memory is not as good as it used to be. It's slowed down. The same thing can happen in the human brain.
That's such a great way to visualize it. So, I'd love to wrap up today by talking about how attorneys can help TBI clients maximize their settlements or the verdict.
Yeah, another good question. So, first of all, you go to an attorney, or if you're an attorney, get those medical records. Rule number one, right? Get the medical record. Get the imaging. If you have the imaging, don't just rely on the paper, what the paper says. Get the actual imaging so the doctors can talk about it. If you're dealing with doctors, which you will be in a traumatic brain injury case, you want to know what they're going to say, how they're going to present. Go speak with the doctors, pay them for their time and speak to them and see what they say about your client, how your client does on their testing, how they're doing today. So it's important to do that. Now, not only that, if your client has residuals, you want to get life care planners involved. That's important to talk about what the future medical care needs are and the costs. When you do get a life care planner involved, you're going to need an economist as well. These cases aren't cheap to work up. If your client can't go back to work, you're going to need a vocational rehabilitation doctor to talk about what types of jobs they're able to do and what types of jobs they're not able to do. So this is important. Make sure you speak to the vocational rehab and if the person needs it. Now, some people can go to work, but they just have a psychological injury that they just can't function well. If you have a liability issue, you may need to get an accident reconstructionist involved to reconstruct the accident and also to show what happened inside, if it's a car or a truck, what happened inside the truck to your client's body and head. And then the doctor is going to put that piece of the puzzle together. You want to address the insurance company tactics. There's good lawyers out there. You can see them. They're advertising on LinkedIn and Facebook and Instagram, and how they beat someone and how they ruin someone's life by getting a defense verdict or helping the insurance company. They sell their soul to the devil, but it is what it is. We don't have a choice. We have to fight them. That's what they chose to do. And so we're here to fight for them. You want to talk about, if you're the attorney and how the attorney can help maximize these cases, you want to talk about what are the long-term financial impacts for the individual. You also want to talk about the loss of independence. Remember, when you are independent, but now you depend on other people because, let's say, your memory is not the same. You're not processing as fast as you used to. And so now you have to depend on people to drive you places. It really depends on what type of injury you have to the brain. If you're going to trial, don't be scared, especially if you're going against a trucking company. You got to put them to task. Don't just take these little offers that they give you, or even if the offer is a good offer, make sure it's a great offer. Your clients deserve the best, and that's what you should be giving them. Never settle for anything but the best. So do that. And then, making sure the families, so you're trying to put it all together and why an attorney can help. You got to counsel the family as well as the client. The family will be able to help you put the pieces of the puzzle together so you can explain it. They can get those journals together. They can record what they see the traumatic brain injury victim is going through. So the family having someone jot down what they're going through and then be able to talk about it and speak to the attorney, but then after put it into a deposition. And then if you need to, you go to trial, that as well. So kind of to sum it up, the attorney is going to take everything that you give them and then start putting the pieces of the puzzle together. How the crash occurred, what doctors do they need to speak to, what diagnostic imaging do they need, what medical records, what's the future look like with a life care planner, what's the future work life look like with a vocational planner, a vocational rehab, and then also documenting it through the before and after witnesses. So that's kind of how I look at it in a nutshell. Of course, there's more. There's only so much we can talk about in a short 20-minute talk. So that's it in a nutshell on how a lawyer should be able to help out a traumatic brain injury victim.
Really great key takeaways here. Thank you so much for joining me again today. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I like doing or talking about traumatic brain injuries and ensuring that other lawyers make sure that they look out for these things and be able to really help their clients as well.
You're a wealth of knowledge. Thanks for tuning in to Road to Recovery, Advocacy and Insights for Trucking Accidents with Sagi Shaked. For more information or to connect with Sagi, visit shakedlaw.com. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a review on your favorite platform.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.